Good evening, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to Casa Italiana Zerilli Marimo. I am Eugenio Refini. I'm the chair of the Department of Italian Studies, which, as you may know, is hosted by Casa Italiana. We are in the same building, and I would like to welcome you all to this event on behalf of the Department of Italian Studies, but also on behalf of Casa Italiana and the director of Casa Italiana, Stefano Albertini. We are really happy to be doing this event tonight, which is really bridging across some of the interests of our community here, scholarship on the one hand, and the arts more broadly on the other hand. And it's an ideal combination of things tonight because we will be really talking about a very sophisticated scholarly achievement, the book which you're going to present, but we will try to put it in conversation with other voices coming from other areas of knowledge, kind of interrelated, and there's sort of an air of family in terms of combining these various cultural threads. So, well, I see that other people are coming. Please join us. The main topic of tonight's conversation is really a recent publication, a book. I have it here. I always like to show books. I know we are living in a digital age and often we do work with ebooks, but I'm still a big fan of paper books. And this is Il Platonico innamorato, Poesia, Amore, Magia in Francesco Patrizi da Cherso. So the Platonist in love, as we titled our event tonight, poetry, love and magic in Francesco Patrizi da Cherso. I won't say anything about Francesco Patrizi because we will hear about him from the author of the book, Tommaso Ghezzani. The book appeared just a few months ago with Leo Olschki, editore, in Florence, so 2023. Let me introduce our author and the other guests who are gonna be in conversation with him tonight. So Tommaso Ghezzani is a PhD candidate in philosophy at the Scuola Normale Superiore di Pisa in co-direction with the University of Geneva. But he's also currently with us this semester as part of a very productive exchange program which the Department of Italian Studies has been running for a few years with the Scuola Normale Superiore. So basically we have every semester a graduate student from Pisa coming to us, and our grad students can go and spend time at the Scuola Normale. It's an agreement which we are extremely proud of. So Tommaso is with us this semester. He's teaching for our department while also working on his research. His dissertation is titled The Theaters of the World, Memoria, Memory and Inventio from Giulio Camillo to Jean Baudin and Robert Flood. His main focus is on the topic of the Theatrum Mundi, the theater of the world, which is a crucial metaphor used in Renaissance culture to talk about many things dealing with various topics, from poetry to magic to science, medicine, basically everything. Tommaso has a master's degree in philosophy from the University of Pisa. He has been working on Francesco Patrizi for a number of years, but he's also a scholar of Montaigne, to which he dedicated his thesis with the Scuola Normale Superiore. His other interests include the art of memory, love treatises, magic and science in the Renaissance, and the relationship between literature, philosophy, art, and the arts more broadly. And as I said, we will be presenting his latest fatica, as we say in Italian, Il Platonico innamorato. So we will begin with a presentation by Tommaso, and then we will have a conversation between Tommaso and three distinguished guests tonight. I'm really happy to presenting these three interlocutors who will be providing different insights into Tommaso's works, and I'm sure they will have tough questions for Tommaso. The first interlocutor is Linda Karshan. I'm really happy to have Linda with us tonight. So Linda, who studied at Skidmore College at La Sorbonne, at the Slade School of University College London, and at the Antioch Centre for British Studies, is an artist. She has been working on several projects for many years. She has a studio in London. She has had it since 1983, and she's really one of those artists whose interests span several media. Of course, she has a particular interest in drawings, which might be considered her primary sort of medium of expression. But of course, she looks at it as a medium which is able to talk to other mediums and other media. I like to use both terms because they have different implications. So with a keen interest in drawing, she has really been trying throughout her life and career to sort of situate her own work and her own understanding of the world into this sort of transitional space. A space which, as I said, kind of go beyond the boundaries of the space of the paper. And I think this idea of moving beyond boundaries in the graphic arts is of extreme interest. Linda is also with us in her capacity as the president of the Athenaeum for the Study of Arts and Letters of La Fondazione Comel in Pisa. It's actually in Pisa, yet another Pisan connection, that in the summer of 2023, Linda met with Tommaso on the occasion of one of the summer schools of the Center for the Study of Medicine and the Body in the Renaissance. I think a very productive conversation has started since that meeting, and we will be benefiting of this conversation tonight with the two of them. The other two speakers will be providing other insights into this conversation. We will have Luca Caldironi, who's a medical doctor, a psychiatrist, a psychotherapist, and a licensed psychoanalyst, was part of the Italian Society of Psychoanalysis, a member of the International Psychoanalytic Association. He's also a lecturer of the theory of psychoanalytical observation and a supervisor and training analyst at the Martha Harris School of Psychoanalytic Psychotherapy in Bologna, and a lecturer at the Linz University of the Arts. He's also the president of Castello 925, a cultural association based in Venice, which really works on the development of contemporary art and situated in the Giardini Biennale. Within these sort of broad interests of Luca's in the arts and how the arts talk to other disciplines, he's been also the founder of a project called Knowledge, devoted to the development of creativity, art, and psychoanalysis, again based sort of across the pond in Venice, but also in New York. So a regular of this sort of trajectory, we are really happy to have him with us tonight. And icing on the cake, our last speaker is our beloved colleague here in the Department of Italian Studies, Nicola Cipani, who's clinical professor at NYU, and also our director of undergraduate studies. Nicola has a number of interests. I can't really go through all of them because that would take too long. He's a scholar of Giordano Bruno and of the art of memory, to which he has dedicated important contributions. More broadly, a scholar of Renaissance philosophy, but also of the intersections between visual and verbal languages, including visual poetry and emblem literature. These are, by the way, topics which might sound, sort of odd and strange these days, but, I'm really happy to report that Nicola teaches classes for our undergraduate students on these topics, and they love the classes. Of course, it's because of Nicola's ability to be an excellent teacher, but I think there's also something about the relevance of these only apparently abstruse topics to our own society these days. He's also a musician, very interested in sound studies and in everything which has to do with machines in a very broad sense. Among his publications, I would like to mention his recent translation, Italian translation of Oswald Wiener, Il miglioramento della Mitteleuropa of 2021, not only because it's a very interesting object per se, but also because because it speaks once again to the really broad variety of skills which Nicola, our sort of Renaissance man, has. So without further ado, I would like to welcome Tommaso for the presentation, and then we will move forward with the conversation. Please, let's welcome Tommaso to the podium.
So, thank you very much, Eugenio. Thank you very much for this very generous presentation, perhaps too generous. But I also thank all this staff of the Casa Italiana for contributing to the organization of this wonderful event. So, this evening we will talk about love and poetry. And I'm quite sure that all of you are thinking, oh, a truly original topic. And your skepticism is partially right. However, in my opinion, we will talk about it in terms that may be a little new for you. First of all, a personal curiosity of mine. How many of you have ever heard of Francesco Patrizi? Can you raise your hand, please? Okay. Almost no one. Okay. In any case, this gentleman named Francesco Patrizi, today unknown to most people, in reality, during the 16th century, was the most famous Platonist philosopher in all of Europe. So famous that Ferrara and then the Sapienza University in Rome had created two among the first chairs of Platonic philosophy in the world at the time, only for him. So famous that when he died in 1597, in the Kingdom of England, it was deemed necessary that even Queen Elizabeth I should be informed of his death. In short, Patrizi would probably be a little disappointed to see that, on the contrary, this evening, so few of you raised the hand. But this is the wheel of fortune of the human species, my friend, so it's normal. I have no intention of dwelling too much on the life and works of Patrizi, since you can find this information in any history of philosophy textbook, but probably the smartest of you are going to see it on Wikipedia. It's good. In any case, this gentleman dealt with many topics: theology, metaphysics, philosophy of nature, history, rhetorics, poetics, mathematics. Obviously, during the Renaissance, they had a lot of free times, my friend. In any case, he was truly cultured. Yet, as often happens to all of us workers in academies and universities, being intelligent and cultured was not enough to earn money, my friend. Not even during the Renaissance. In fact, before becoming a very illustrious Platonic professor in Ferrara and Rome, Patrizi had to earn a living as a private tutor, but one of the most well-known and cultured women of the century, the poet, musician, and scholar Tarquinia Molza from Modena. It was precisely in Modena that Patrizi set his last work, written in a dialogic form, De Amorosa Filosofia, written in 1577. After these works, in fact, all his other works had the form of highly erudite treatises. Perhaps we could agree with the polite, very polite judgment of Giordano Bruno when he defined these Patrizi's treatises as the shit of a pedant. Or agree with Jacopo Mazzoni, who said, in a more delicate way, that Patrizi was a writer gifted with a copper gut, the only way to digest so much erudition. Luckily for you all, the Amorosa Filosofia is instead an elegant dialogue written in a very captivating and refined way. In this work, the two main characters are Patrizi himself and Tarquinia Molza, obviously. However, it is not Patrizi who leads the dialogue and its profound philosophical truths, but his young pupil, Tarquinia. Just think, this philosopher who had spent his whole life studying non-stop Greek, Latin, Hebrew, and who knows how many other languages, discoverer of unknown codes on the pre-Socratics and the Neoplatonist, a very severe philologist. In this dialogue, he delivers the role of the protagonist and the custodian of the truth to his young pupil. And he also gets mocked by her. Honestly, if in class my students treated me like Tarquinia treat Patrizi in this dialogue, I would be very offended. But Patrizi doesn't get it offended. On the contrary. In the Amorosa Filosofia, we read, in fact, through the character of Tarquinia, that I have known this for some time, that all Platonists say to be and want to be in love all their lives. And you, because you, Patrizi, because you say you are a Platonist, you are consequently also in love. The reason that may have pushed Patrizi to the threshold of self-irony in this passage are multiple. First of all, the intolerance towards the pedantry of the courtier who talk about love in a cloying and superficial way. From these references, undoubtedly, emerge a strong intolerance toward the idlest contemporary court lines. But above all, the statement put in the mouth of Tarquinia allows us to grasp one of the main aspects that at the time characterized the Platonic direction in the 16th century, namely the marked interest in the theme of love, which very often was parallel to the theme of poetry. And the poetry is inextricably linked to music, obviously. Evidently, in the most social and worldly conversations, this discussion had become stale and superficial at the time. But Patrizi wants to save them. In Patrizi's work, these topics represent the most powerful tool and weapon available to the most culturally and politically engaged intellectuals. And this evening, we'll see how this is possible. But let's try to go a little deeper into this text, the Amorosa Filosofia. In the incipit, the character of Antonio Querenghi, a well-known scholar of the time and a sincere friend of Patrizi, explains to his scholar friend the reason why Patrizi was so happy to stop in Modena. That is, obviously, the presence of Tarquinia Molsa. Querenghi does not hesitate to describe Tarquinia as beautiful, but of a very singular beauty, which is admirable because of the opposing effects it produces. Among these effects is the fascination exercised on Patrizi himself, who thinks he discovers new things in that divine face which he considers incomprehensible. And again, under the banner of the ineffability of such beauty, Querenghi narrates the prodigious event by which many painters, unable to find stable measures to portray her, obtained portraits that were all different from each other, and in any case, non even resembling Tarquinia. The measurement of such beauty is therefore impossible. Almost a squaring of the circle. Not only for Patrizi, but also for the expert eye of many painters. To this is added the topic of androgynous perfection, an interesting topic in the Renaissance. Indeed, Querenghi adds that the beauty of Tarquinia is a very sweet temperament of the feminine and masculine, which is so confused or mixed that no clear part of either element can be distinguished, and therefore one and the other appear ineffable and incomprehensible in every part. Characterizing this wonderful mix between masculine and feminine is once again the sense of wonder, derived from a component that tends to escape human understanding. To explain this fact, Querenghi recalls the justification revealed to him by Patrizi himself, who identified the source of such a beauty by a divinity that has poured themselves into that phase as an excellent copy of themselves, which is made according to the custom of things above, that is, both hidden and manifest. and therefore incomprehensible both to the eyes and to the mind of every mortal human being. From this and from her superhuman excellencies of the soul, it followed that the mortal human being, all dumb, when they find themselves among ordinary human beings, they want to call her Tarquinia or the mistress, that is, by the name imposed on her by those who make the noble profession of serving her. But when the mortal person finds themselves among sacred intellects, he would call her by no other name but that of beautiful in all, body and soul, of divine and admirable. The ineffability of Tarquinia's beauty, therefore, derives from the theory of beauty as a visible manifestation at different hierarchical levels of reality of divine godliness. Tarquinia, therefore, initially appears incomprehensible to the observer, as she is placed between the transcendent, occult, and the earthly manifest. Only through the progressive cognitive ascent can one, in fact, be able to grasp her real identity. Let us also to focus on the emphasis relating to the peculiar phenomenology of the earthly beauty of Tarquinia, structured through the mediation of opposing couples. In fact, this beauty manifests itself as finite, but at the same time immeasurable, feminine, but at the same time masculine, visible, but at the same time invisible, earthly, but at the same time divine. All this causes wonder in the observers that finds themselves in a similar state of mediation between two poles. They appear ignorant, but also knowledgeable. Furthermore, to be taken into consideration is the reaction of Quarenghi's listeners to this passionate description. In particular, Giulio Carrato, after this description, states that Patrizi is very truthful and has a very fine judgment, especially on matters concerning love and beauty. So, we know that he would grasp nothing but the truth. This has caused, in so few words, that you have told us, that saying to occur to me that man, for all fame, falls in love. Complete with a reference to a verse by Petrarch, Carrato therefore reveals a sort of a loving reaction resulting only from the verbal portrait of Tarquinia. Like the real Tarquinia, her poetic portrait, made of words, would similarly seem capable of arousing wonder. Hearing thus seems to move the soul in the same way that sight moves it. The poetic fury and loving fury of the Platonic tradition does end up overlapping. The inspired poet therefore show themselves as one who is capable of grasping the hidden structure of the beauty of a specific subject and translating it poetically, retaining the ability to move amorous desire in the listener. the listener transforms into a true observer in love. In this sense, the poet's aim would seem to be that of being able to grasp the oppositional couples that structure the beauty of the world, and of being able to expertly rebuild them, to reconstruct them through the poetical verses. And several times in the text, Tarquinia is shown as an authentic poet. In this direction, she is not only an aesthetic subject, but above all, an aesthetic producer. And in this sense, the two things go in a complementary way. To understand the ultimate goal of all this description of Amorosa Philosophia, however, we must observe the specific social situation that emerge from these pages. The Modena house of Tarquinia, although not a real court, nevertheless shows a courtly and intellectual circle. This circle is completely detached from the logic of the prevailing and all-encompassing censorship of the Italian Counter-Reformation period. The situation in Modena is also completely detached from even the most frivolous courtly idleness. Just think of the presence among the interlocutors' characters of the Amorosa Philosophia of Bernardino Telesio, author of explosive natural theories, Theories Condamned Heretics in 1596. Or of Querenghi himself, who was the referent of the famous biographical letter from prison of Tommaso Campanella, philosopher condemned and disgustingly tortured for heresy by the Holy Inquisition in 1601. What can I say? The Counter-Reformation undoubtedly preferred that scholars speak about love and poetry in a naive and superficial way. However, Patrizi doesn't agree, and in his work, he makes people who were already dangerously uncomfortable and disliked by the church talk about these topics. However, the real distance from the house and the circle of Tarquinia compared to the idle and superficial courts of the time is represented, above all, by the figure of Tarquinia himself. Her discussion about love, as Patrizi specifies at a certain point, are in fact not like those that in some courts one hears said by gentle courtiers and gentle palace lady from question and answer speeches, which are superficial. Not the ironic content. Tarquinia, despite being outside the university space, reasons, on the contrary, with philosophical foundations, not only drawn from Plato, Xenophon, Plotinus, and other noble writers ancient and less ancient, but as if she were more than a new Diotima, formed in her mind as a new, true, and perfect philosophy. Modena and its lady offer a space in which conversations about beauty and love promote deeply philosophical issues. Patrizi shows us how the cultural activity of a restored academic courtier environment is parallel to that of the most transgressive and non-aligned scholars. The modern environment with Tarquinius reasoning shows a refined society in which, free from oppressive institutional and doctrinal constraints, the intellectuals who gather there can participate in a sort of collective love experience. Rising to wisdom, eggs unattainable elsewhere. Enjoying the contradiction of the beauty of Tarquinia, the poetic praises that are inspired by the air, and the poems of Tarquinia herself means participating fully in a wonder capable of illuminating the most hidden structures of the entire world. This is the intellectual attitude that accompanied Patrizi to the Duchy of Ferrara. After having concluded his teaching period in Modena, he was in fact called by none other than Duke Alfonso II to the court of Ferrara, the same enlightened court under which Ludovico Ariosto and Torquato Tasso had worked. In short, Ferrara was a bit of a chic Manhattan of the time. And obviously, it was looked with a very high suspicion by Rome. While he was engaged as the first professor of the Platonic philosophy in Ferrara, here Patrizi composed a giant work entitled Decche della Poetica. Let us therefore move momentarily to talk about this work on the poetry, and shortly we will see how it is linked to the discussion on love. The work, unfinished, is made up of 7 parts, 7 decche in total, which, however, must have been 10. The first 2 decche were published in the 1586 in Ferrara, and the other 5 decche remain unpublished. What interests us is the Decca Mirabile, namely the theoretical nucleus of the entire project. In it, the essence of the poetic text is defined. Patrizi, in fact, decides to reject and subvert the teaching of Aristotle's poetics. Indeed, the Counter-Reformation had taken the Aristotelian poetics to the extreme, in such a way as to ensure that poetic works were rigidly based on norms that did not disturb holy morality. Patrizi decides to demonstrate, however, that Aristotelian norms are all wrong and ridiculous, very modest. Many Aristotelian professors of the time, in fact, attributed above all the essence of the poetic genre to the imitation of reality. Imagine how boring it would be if their teaching had been successful up until our time. Patrizi says exactly the opposite. For him, the purpose of poetry is not to passively imitate reality, but to arouse wonder. Poetry, therefore, transcends reality. To do this, Patrizi first demonstrated the religious origin of poetry, and therefore how it was born to overcome ordinary and everyday nature. He thus deduced that the essence of poetry is constituted by the wonder. Wonder is not something vague and indefinite, but is analyzed almost more geometrico as something that arises from the awareness of something that is superior to us, but also relatively unknown. Patrizi then shows how to produce excellent poems that are wonderful poems. More geometrico, he explains how the wonder arises from the fusion of two registers, that of the credible and that of the uncredible, each of which arises from specific topical orders, which must be combined with those of the opposite registers. After having anatomized the formation of the wonder subject, he then goes on to study the effect on the wonder on the human soul. Poetic wonder, be careful at this point. Poetic wonder is shown through the same effects as the loving affection between two lovers. Precisely from this, it is possible to weave a parallelism between the poetic wonder and the beauty of the beloved. That is, between the topical proportions, that is, the proportions of the text and the proportions of the beloved, that is, the proportions of beauty of the word. Patrizi also recalls here a debate that was still very strong among scholars at the time, namely the debate on magic. Magic was in fact interpreted by the major philosophers of the time as the operational part of philosophy. Magic at the time was not considered the practice of some of our contemporary charlatans that we occasionally see on television. On the contrary, this discipline was considered as the concrete art through which the philosopher managed to put his knowledge into action in order to tangibly act on the world. The first to attempt to re-establish magic on a philosophical basis was Patrizi's spiritual master, the Florentine Marsilio Ficino, who defined magic as the artificial establishment of a loving bond, carried out by a wise philosopher. This definition is based on an ontological paradigm which implies the communication of all degrees of reality through a bond of a passionate nature. Patrizi, in his Poetica, observes how this bond can be controlled by the poet-philosopher, who is in fact a poet-magician. Actually, poetic language acquires magical powers. It is no coincidence that one of the most cited poetic models is that of the Orphic hymns, extremely fundamental text for modern Platonists starting from Ficino. Poetry, which is also music, which is also philosophy, which is also magic, which is also a love of inspiration, lent itself perfectly to the figure of Orpheus. A poet-philosopher in love who, through the magic, accomplished many miracles. He dragged the inanimate stones, he enchanted the rivers, and tamed the most ferocious beasts. He managed to defeat death itself for a moment. Patrizi reinterprets all this from the perspective of political magic, the most authentic form of magic that he conceives. The stone, the rivers, and the animals are in fact none other than primitive and bestial human beings, who, through the loving magic of poetic beauty of music, they managed to be brought back to the bond of the consortium of civilization. Another fundamental model for modern Platonists, perhaps the most important, is precisely the legendary figure of the Egyptian priest Hermes Trismegistus. Hermes that is 3 times great. What were these greatness of Hermes? Obviously, the magical philosophical knowledge, the religious wisdom, and the power to create political harmony. Consider that all these theories, which to us today seems so distant from our culture, at a certain point, they even become commercial for the late Renaissance. Don't you believe me? Probably. But we have to think, for example, to the famous prologue to Claudio Monteverdi, Orfeo. So, an opera from 1607, the first to have an extraordinary commercial success. And we are going to listen this piece. And in the prologue, the allegory of music speaks. And as it was said, she is consubstantial with poetry. What does the allegory of music say? We are going to see the video. So, Okay, did you listen well? Did you listen well? Edor d'amore, posso infiammar le più gelate menti. Edor d'amore, posso infiammar le più gelate menti. Music manages not only to kindle the frozen minds and the hearts with love, but also to magically kindle the love of the listening souls towards the highest music, the music of the spheres. That is, the hidden harmony produced by the motion of the planets. At the time, these planets, which are not considered as inert celestial bodies, but living beings, who sing, play, converse, and make human being fall in love. E in questa guisa l'armonia sonora della lira del ciel più l'alme invoglio. The music poetry and the love movement that she magically arouses, therefore, here too, is not shown as a poor and boring photograph of reality, but as something that goes beyond earthly and everyday reality. She is something capable of arousing the most profound wonder, punctuated by the dialectic between known and unknown, rational and incomprehensible. All the elements that come into play in the poetical loving experience, therefore marked by the same theoretical mechanism of oppositional mediation, can therefore be ordered in this form. The tyrannical chains of the disharmonically totalitarian power and of a degraded and corrupt culture must be replaced by the magical bonds of the poet-philosopher in love. Only this last type of a society, however elitist, can support the harmony of political pacification, in the opinion of Patrizi. In this sense, the purpose of art is described as that capable of harmonizing all these oppositions. Therefore, the work of art must not limit itself to becoming a simple mirror that passively reproduces reality. Art, like love, in fact, constitutes a glimmer of light towards the secret and the hidden plot that shapes the world. As we can observe in a different artistic genre, but extremely in line with what has been observed, this painting by Dosso Dossi, Jupiter painting butterflies, stands as a perfect visual synthesis of our conversation. It is very interesting that Dosso died exactly in Ferrara. What Jupiter paints, namely three butterflies, sea butterflies, are in fact reproduced, as you can see, on a somewhat strange canvas. This canvas, in fact, almost seems to reflect the colors of the sky in the painting. Therefore, it is not a canvas, but a mirror. But not a passive mirror, since otherwise it would have to reproduce the precise appearance of Jupiter. What Jupiter sets up is therefore a distorting mirror that is a living, non-passive mirror, which precisely arouses authentic wonder in us by deconstructing apparent reality and revealing its secret plot. But what is the relationship between Jupiter and the three butterflies? In which sense these are a reflection that disclose the hidden and the non-apparent truth of the world? Well, soul in Greek is psyche, which also means butterfly. Furthermore, according to Plato and Aristotle, there are three parts of the soul. Jupiter is therefore not simply painting butterfly, but he's painting on his mirror canvas a self-portrait, not a passively imitative self-portrait, but rather a reproductive one. The loving gaze through which Jupiter contemplates his own work, just like the loving gaze through which the poet contemplates his own poem, or just as the lover contemplates their beloved, is therefore not an egoistic mirroring. Rather, it is a wonderful reflection that reveal the immeasurable measures hidden in the world. Patrizi was perfectly aware of the magical power of love and art. In fact, two sides of the same coin, and starting precisely from this aesthetic revolution, he attempted to re-establish the cultural society of his time. Doing philosophy, kissing the beloved person, contemplating them, observing their portraits, whether pictorial or verbal, are all things that therefore trigger the same psychological powers, starting from which true knowledge is achieved. The Gesamtkunstwerk, the total work of art, which is a concept that was made famous by Wagner in the 19th century, in reality, already in the Italian Renaissance, showed all its political and magical power. Patrizi, therefore, shows himself as one of the last great intellectuals who give us the fundamental message of the Renaissance, according to which human beings can never ignore erotic and artistic beauty. Grazie.
I think I go first. Okay. Amazing. I'm here, as a visual artist, as Eugenio explained.
The mic is next to your mouth.
Yes.
We are also online.
Okay. Oh, yes. That does work. Okay. Having met Tommaso in Pisa, he presented a paper on his topic of the theaters of memory, and I was there as a visual artist, and that is where we stand today. I'd like to talk about necessity and freedom from a position of experience. In the work that I do, these performance drawings, my training is twofold. I'm trained in the Bauhaus method, which gives me the ability to build a drawing so that it doesn't fall apart when I get up close. That is the necessity side. But on the other hand, the very crucial side, I have a degree in psychology, and I studied transitional space as defined by Donald Winnicott. It's the space that Luca inhabits on a daily basis in his psychoanalytical practice. And as Winnicott says, and I believe, it is here and only here that anything original gets made. So that is the space of creativity. That's the space of religion and love. It's the space of love and poetry, and that is your topic. And so that's where I stand. And I wanted to ask you about Tarquinia's early formation then. Was the model of Isabella d'Este in Ferrara, was she a model for her? This is the kind of courtly culture that anyone in my formation is so enamored of and so close to.
So, thank you for the question. In this sense, Tarquinia is what in Italy we call figlia d'arte, daughter of art. In fact, his father, Francesco Maria Molza, was a very important poet of the time. And in fact, his father was very attentive to her education, because in addition to poetry and music, obviously, because she was a multi-instrumentalist, we have a lot of attestation by letters, etc., of the time regarding the interest of Tarquinia in philosophy, but also sciences, astronomy, natural sciences, and languages. She speaks Italian, Spanish, Greek, Latin, Hebrew, and I don't know what other languages, but yes, this is the situation.
Okay, so that takes me nicely then to another idea, having read your English translation, that of the portrait, as we've been talking about the portrait, that she was, one could not capture her with these different sides to her, that the painters did not have the possibility, there was this ineffable nature about her. So I'm interested in the idea of the self-portrait, and the idea of the studiolo that you refer to. Was this a kind of self-fashioning for Tarquinia?
Okay, when we talk about studiolo, I imagine that you think about the Isabella d'Este studiolo, obviously. Yes, a beautiful studiolo in Ferrara, but two studioli maybe. And yes, as far as I know, there was no study in the Tarquinia house so beautiful at the Isabella d'Este studiolis but why we are talking about studiolo? Because at the time, the concept of the studiolo, namely a room in which the knowledge is organized and shown by images, it was conceived as a sort of representation of the owner of the house. So the self-portrait was in a certain sense reflected in the house of the owner, in particular in the studiolo. And in this sense, Yes, in Modena we don't have a studiolo as a self-portrait studiolo as in Ferrara Isabella d'Este had. But if we don't conceive the studiolo in a literary sense of a concrete room, but if we conceive as a sort of general structure in which knowledge in all these forms can be made visible and organized, then I would say that is undoubtedly also happen in Modena during these meetings described in the Amorosa Filosofia. We've in fact just seen that the distance between sight and hearing was in fact very labile for all of these scholars. So the self-portraits, in this sense, represented by Tarquinia, Isabella, in his scholarship activity, it could be represented in a concrete form, in a tangible form, in a concrete studiolo, but also the studiolo could be a mental space, a memory mental spaces. So if in Modena we don't have a concrete studiolo, we have a lot of mental concrete studioli.
Okay, so that really anticipates, it's not exactly a question, but something I would like to just say. It's the first jotting in my own group of jottings, and it's from Henry James. He says, we must recognize our particular form, the instrument that each of us who carries anything carries in his being. Mastering that instrument, learning to play it to perfection. That's what I call duty, what I call conduct, what I call success. So I've said, what was her particular form? What was her aura? And indeed, it's more the aura that you speak of. And I understand that perfectly, because that is that space in between, the transitional space that is at the heart of art, religion, love, poetry. And you've been talking about the gaze, too. The gaze certainly between the mother and her infant, the kind of gaze that you have, Luca, between yourself and your analysand, the gaze that I have with an emerging work of art. It is a thing of wonder. And there's, you really can't pin it down. And that's the territory that you're talking about here. On poetry, the purpose of rhythm, it has always seemed to me, is to prolong the moment of contemplation, the moment when we are both asleep and awake, which is the one moment of creation, by hushing us with an alluring monotony, while it holds us waking by variety, to keep us in that state of perhaps real trance, in which the mind, liberated from the pressure of the will, is unfolded in symbols. So that's Yeats on the symbolism of poetry. I would say that in that transitional space, that's not quite right, that it's not a state of trance. Rather, one is in almost forensic attention in making art. Can you say anything about that, Tommaso?
In this sense, the concept of aura is very interesting, because yes, I've talked about aura, but I don't define it in effect. The point is that I have to do a premise. In the Renaissance Neoplatonist aesthetic, the beauty is conceived in two different manners. There are the scholars that say, oh yes, the beauty is the mathematical proportion of the part of the body, for example. But we have also the scholars that say, oh, no, that's terrible. The mathematical proportions are material. The beauty is something of a spiritual. So the beauty, it's impossible that the beauty could be a mathematical proportion. The beauty, it's a sort of light. It's a sort of light because if you see an effet, the sunlight, it's a beauty without part. And the light doesn't have mathematical parts. Oh, well, the light have. We can now, in 2024, analyze the light from a mathematical point of view, but at the time they can't. So they see the light as the example of the supreme beauty, that is a beauty without part. So the aura was conceived for Patrizi and for the Neoplatonist circle in this sense as an aesthetic experience that, yes, we are or agree that if a person who we beloved don't respect determined proportion, that like to us, the love experience, it's difficult to kindle. But the point is that the true love is beyond this step, and in this sense, it's the same for the work of the artist of the time. Patrizi wrote his works when the so-called manierismo find his prolific field of germination. And what's the difference between the manierismo and the authentic Renaissance figurative art? This, that if you see the Mona Lisa by Leonardo and compared to the Madonna col collo lungo, Madonna with the long neck by Parmigianino, you find a completely different concepts, not only of the beauty, but also of the work of the artist. So, to come back to your answer, in this moment when Patrizi writes this concept, the beauty is conceived not in a mathematical way, but it's an lightening way, and the aura is this. The aura is the light of the beauty, but what's the light of beauty? It's the beauty conceived in movement. The beauty conceived in movement. What the problem of, for example, the classical canon of classical art is that, oh yes, we see the discobolus, we see a lot of statues that there speak some specific proportions, but in the Renaissance they say, okay, the beauty is something that can move themselves. So the proportion, the mathematical proportion, it's not enough. It's not enough. The aura that is beauty, it's something that show a light. It's something that it's alive, and it's something that is in movement.
Okay, so that, of course, is Leonardo's Moti dell'Animo, something that is very much close to my heart. I just, apropos of what you said, I keep in mind very often, Platonist, the mind sheds radiance on the objects of sense out of its own store. And what one has in one's store will probably vary from cultural moment to cultural moment. So I'm going to skip ahead then to A.B. Warburg and Cassirer and the a note on symbolic form, so far as I understand it. I just tried to come to terms with Warburg very, very recently, and I think in light of your research, Tommaso, and my last point here, Warburg cites Jacob Burckhardt in saying that Italian ceremonial, in its highest form, is a true transition from life into art. And for me, it seems almost second nature, because as I make my work, my body is always adjusting itself in pursuit of beauty and grace. Quite simply, it's what the body does when all goes well. So I find myself taking balletic positions in search of beauty and grace, and surely that was how ballet came to be from the court, the early Renaissance court. So Luca, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. So, yeah, I would like to share with you my feelings. I'm very used to do that with my work, with during my sessions, and also outside my office. So probably I'm doing something different now because I have not really several questions. I just want to share with you my notes. And my superego probably is too strong right now, so I cannot be enough free to ask a question, and thinking also about question. I think also is like the maladie de la question. To answer a question should be a little sometimes a little dangerous, because you can stop your thought, and you're running on your thought. But let me share at the beginning, my first feeling. My first feeling is a little uncanny now, because, listen, Tommaso before, so I was born in Ferrara, my middle school is Torquato Tasso, and my high school is Ariosto. And after that, I moved to Modena. And when I arrived in Modena, I was very proud to be born in Ferrara, because the Estensi in Ferrara, they were rich, and the castle was very nice, nicer than the Palazzo Ducale in Modena. And the Palazzo Ducale, with the front of the Palazzo Ducale has marble only in the right part and not in the left, because Estensi ran away for the money. So it was not possible to have a very nice palace like in Ferrara. And this is my first geography of my emotion. And second, of course, coming here, I was thinking what the meaning and the function to be a psychoanalyst in a conversation like this. And of course, the question can also remain open and in progress. The word conversation derives from the Latin verb convertere, that means to turn around, like when you plow the field back and forth for putting seeds down. And so I am also interested through a transdisciplinary approach in the extension of our fields of study. And in all this, I am encouraged by the statement by Heraclitus that change alone is unchanging. Probably this is why I am here. I would like to point out that the analytical approach dealing with the experienced individual emotional feelings can be a useful tool in approaching phenomena that concern not only the individual, but also their extension to the group and society in its various manifestations. Art and creativity in general are an excellent probe into this cognitive and emotional process. Marx Ernst says that creativity is that marvelous capacity to grasp mutually distinct realities and draw a spark from their juxtaposition. So we do not only see, Tommaso, you explained very well before, we don't only see what we see, but we also see what the experience arouses within us. So we see what we feel, and our representation of reality is always linked to our emotional experience. It is what I would call like a transitive psychoanalysis, which comes out of the analytic room and itself becomes a moment of experience and research. My remarks, therefore, start from Tommaso's research. Indeed, I would like to use Tommaso's work as an aesthetic object, a trigger object, an attempt to extend it through my free association. It's something that Eugenio said before, is my knowledge project. Knowledge project is the acronym of knowledge, is the K, and like knowledge, and now, the here and now, hic et nunc in Latin, and L with the passion of love, and always walking in the edge of something. From the edge, you can see both the sides around you. So now I want to use as a key to entry the image that Tommaso you chose as the poster, not the poster, but was the last picture of our conversation, of your talk, sorry. The image that has been evocative for me more than for one point. The first, I said before, my origin in Ferrara, Dosso Dossi was the school of my mother. Dream thinking, of course, proceeds by images, and also we have art. Nietzsche says, we have art so that we may not perish by the truth. So little by little, we can try to understand a little better about which kind of truth we are going to talk about. So, returning to the image you showed before, in the triptych representing Jupiter, Mercury, and virtue, so many aspects struck me, including the twisting of the bodies, the different languages, the colors, the dreamlike gaze of Jupiter, who, protected by a caring Mercury, who puts the needs of virtue in the waiting room, lets the butterfly souls be reflected in this canvas mirror. It reminds me of the development of a dream, an alchemical lightness to be protected, and as George Bernard Shaw reminds us, one uses a glass mirror to look at one's face, and one uses works of art to look at one's soul. I return now, Tommaso, to when you talk about the beauty of Tarquinia, and you speak of manifestation of the divine made visible in various ontological levels. You speak of occult and manifest. You seem, in my view, to be setting us on the way to a process of knowledge which, as in analytic experience, can only be transitive and transitory, but at the same time immanent. This sense of immanence is carried into the analytic method I would describe as ontological. We can call ontological psychoanalysis as well, from ontos, present participle of the verb eimi in Greek, to be. In this reflection of mine is also approachable to the concept expressed very well by Linda of a transitional space, of course by Winnicott, the space of creativity, and in the famous book, Playing in Reality. And Tommaso, I noticed that you also use the term ontological many times, and I was wondering if you could elaborate on this aspect in light of my reflections.
So, yes, ontological is a term that we philosophers use to feel us more intelligent than the other people. But ontological in the sense that I use it in my conversation with all of you is conceived as in the context of the graduation of reality. In this sense, when I talk about the different ontological appearance of the beauty, of the godness, that starting from God, the intellect, the earth, the nature, the concept of the ontological beauty depends from this. There is in the Renaissance age this idea that is the beauty, it's an idea, namely a universal concept that all the human soul have innate in themselves. But this common idea is ontologically divided in different levels. So when I use the term ontological, I refer to this tradition. That is a tradition that refers to a common root of the reality, a common root of the measurement of the reality, but have different reflections in hierarchical levels of reality. So, ontological, I think that probably we could easily substitute ontological with a hierarchical manifestation.
Thank you, Tommaso. In the examples you offer, it seems that the face of Tarquinia is irreducible with respect to trying to be represented. Even if multiple painters attempt to capture it, this always escapes as an inexhaustible source of movement and emotion. Heraclitus says that nature loves to hide. In all this beauty as well, poetry, how can it be grasped? Is another question, or we can also give the open question because it's a huge question. And another more recent poet that I love, Dino Campana, in Canti Orfici, in his Orphic songs, referred to this mystery of poetry and the more general mystery of life through his night song Chimera. And he ends his poem saying several times, La chiamerò chimera, I'll call you chimera. And this, I think, is very evocative and was my free association with your work, because chimera is a mythical name of an imaginary monster of the night, compounded of incongruous parts, an illusion of the mind, a dream-like experience. This figure reminds to me another form of chimera that is in your reference to the use of a oxymoron, like a rhetoric figure. And you highlight, in fact, how Patrizi emphasized the oxymoron, an oxymoron that, recovering its etymological root of acute and obtuse, suggests to us a special dimension, a space where not only things can happen, but where opposites can coexist and playing together. In chemistry, we might say there is no solution, but a suspension. You might add a participatory suspension. In our case, the manifest and the hidden coincide in the here and now of the image, and at the same time give us a sense of displacement. When you, Tommaso, referring to Patrizi, speak of true knowledge, you bring me back to some psychodynamic concept of being beyond, when Bion says and points out to us the difference between a more general knowledge, he says K, and knowledge such as that derived from the experience of being in knowledge, to be in awe, he says. So I would like to ask you maybe a little more about this concept of knowledge, if you want.
This is particularly interesting because when I talk about knowledge, about the mediation of knowledge, ignorance, we have a problem because we conceive the opposite of the rational as irrational in 2024. But it's not the same point that they had in the Renaissance age, because yes, I have shown how the work of art, the poem, and the love experience have to be something that is beyond the everyday life, the everyday experience. But in this sense, the reason is something that it's not enough to grasp the totality of the universe, but we have this opposition between the rational, irrational, and irrational, not rational. But in the Renaissance, they have obviously rational, not rational, but they had also a third pole that we could name the over-rational, sovra-razionale. It's the intellect of the Platonic tradition that it's not irrational, but it's not neither the reason, the discursive reason. It's a sort of super experience where the not rational, the reason, go beyond, and when the human being learned can find a universal vision of the universe. But so when we read this text, we have to keep attention in this sense, because there were a lot of Platonists that said, oh, the reason it's only a part of the human ascendant process, but it's not be confused with the not rational. They conceived a different concept of sovereign-rational.
Thank you, Tommaso. Yes, and when you speak about reality, so we think that reality cannot be limited to that of being awake, but which expands into what also we can call the dream state, the waking dream, and also in a psychoanalytical way, also we have the dreamlike memory. It is a state like the one captured by Patrizi that offers us the possibility of seeing the object and the shadow of the object, of approaching what Christopher Bollas calls the unthought known, the known not yet thought. This kind of vision makes me think of a magical vision, an enchant. It seemed to me that the word magic has its origin in Persian culture, in particularly in that Zoroaster, and indicates this kind of art out of the ordinary. So you can just tell a little more about the concept of magic. I think it's very interesting for me.
In this sense, the magic is really overlapped with the love experience. But what type of love experience? Because we are used to imagine the love experience as an interpersonal experience with a person, with another person. But we have to conceive the love experience as a sort of experience in a more deep sense, the love is the love of the philosopher for knowledge. The love is the love of the artist for their work. The love, in this sense, is, if we follow the definition in the Plato Symposium, love is the desire of beauty. But what's the beauty? It's the good. It's the realization of the self. And the magic use this deep concept of love to constitute a system to control it. And this is the reason for which I talk about the magic in a political sphere, because the politician, in this sense, have to create a bond in the community to reconduct the entirety of the community in a center, the center of what they consider as the good, as the realization. But this is the definition of the magic that we find in the Renaissance, starting from Ficino.
Thank you, Tommaso. And another note concerns your definition of poetic language, a language capable of recomposing the unity between soma and psyche. The power of poetry is a magical power, but equally very factual, in that it is derived from the Greek verb poieo, which is to do, in one of the way to say to do in Greek. The work of recomposition between psyche and body is a work that needs depth. And I was wondering if, when you say that manifestation cannot exist without darkness, you mean that work in light darkness, we say in Italian chiaroscuro, implies going deep. And I want to share with you two quotes, and maybe to listen your ideas. One is, out of darkness and formlessness, something evolves. And the other is, a beam of intense darkness.
Very interesting, and I am going to answer to this point in a very short way with give you a reference. In the Platonist ancient tradition, Neoplatonist ancient tradition, they find a metaphorical topic that had a great success in the first modern age, and it's also an interesting topic that we can find also, for example, in the Kabbalistic tradition. This dialectics between light and shadow, it's fundamental because they say that what is the supreme light of God if not a supreme shadow? But why this? Because the situation of the human beings is in a state of is a difficult situation, because the human being, to be a human being, is in every situation as a sort of constraints between two poles. So without light we can't have shadow, without shadow we can't light, and this is the reason for which, for example, the Kabbalists describe the supreme light as a death, because when the human beings become an angel, when the human beings is perfectly happy, this is the depth of the human situation.
Thank you, Tommaso. There are several examples also very interesting from Freud, when Freud says, I know that I have artificially blinded myself and my work in order to concentrate all the light on the one dark passage. But this is, we can speak another time. My last aspect, question or note is another aspect you emphasize is in creative work is that of intuition. And in this regard, it's interesting for me to remember and to show and to share with you how in the exhibition Intuition held in Venice in 2017, the curator Verwoerd, speaking about the theme of the exhibition, says, intuition is a feeling that comes from total freedom, from being at one with cosmic energy. It is knowledge before knowledge. It is understanding before understanding. Intuition is the result of processing a large number of messages that spring up in our brains and our bodies. And with intelligence, we suddenly see the light. Intuition gives us new ideas and doesn't always tell us where those ideas come from. This I want to share with you this.
I would say that's true from experience.
Thank you for the invitation, Tommaso. I think that the broad themes have been covered so excellently and exhaustively, so I would just offer a couple of brief, more narrow remarks, since I've been graciously invited as Giordano Bruno fan, and as Giordano Bruno has been already mentioned as the culprit who defined Patrizi as like a pedantic crap, you know. I just wanted to put that a bit in context, because we have a second, rather opposite statement by Bruno in a very crucial moment of his life when he was already captive. He was already in the hands of the Inquisition, and he was about to sustain the trial that would then result, after 7 years of imprisonment, into his death on the scaffold. And he says, so che il Patrizi è filosofo. I know that Patrizi is a philosopher. And so just how do we put these two things together, that Bruno in a very important moment of his life, as is about to perform his last great work, which is the trial, he releases such a clear statement on the fact that Patrizi does belong to the number of philosophers and not to crap. So just to go on the crappy side first, it's likely that Bruno's ungenerous comment was based on his limited knowledge of Patrizi's body of work, and he knew probably the Discussiones peripatetiche of Patrizi, which actually contained a stance that should have pleased him, since Patrizi was trying to criticize Aristotelian philosophy. But according to Bruno, probably he did so from a pedantic angle. So what prompted the second comment, so I know that Patrizi deserves to be in the number of the philosophers, it can be only conjectural, because we don't know for sure what Bruno knew from Patrizi. So I was going to offer a list of overlaps that perhaps then Tommaso can vouch for or discard as the expert in the field, but things that strike me immediately as point of contact, at least so in a very let's say preliminary and tentative fashion. So both Patrizi and Bruno belong to this kind of interesting figure of traveling philosophers, itinerant encyclopedias. We have others, like some of them are, like Bruno, great geniuses of memory, like Giulio Camillo, another author that Tommaso has covered in his research, or before Peter of Ravenna. So these kind of traveling mnemonists who were carrying with themselves like entire books memorized by heart. Patrizi has also this stylistic decision on the very important communicative level to write most of his works in Italian, and then some of his works in Latin. And just we see that Bruno has adopted a similar communicative strategy. I would say also that Patrizi's cultural backbone is not so much oriented towards Latin authors, but rather towards Greek authors. This is something that Tommaso points out in his essay. And I would say that this Hellenic quality, also kind of the Hellenic propensity, is also the lens. Greece becomes, this is also another thing that the book is discussing in detail, the Greek culture is also the lens of all these other cultures that are, kind of contained in it, are kind of bagged into the Greek repertoire. Greek culture, according to Patrizi, is the right medium to just launch an inquiry into the more mysterious Chaldean and ancient philosophies, Egypt, etc. Central to Patrizi's philosophy is the thematic of furors, and it is, I gather, not a type of furor that is celebrated as an excess, perhaps in the way that Bruno does. So in that might lie a certain difference between the two. But still, the doctrine of furors, and so an attempt to reason on the conditions into which this tendency to excess becomes productive, is also common to both. Then there is the whole memory aspect. I was struck by at some point, I think it's in the Amorosa Filosofia, Patrizi inserts himself into a topical grid, right? And so according to which he assigns to certain personae certain qualities and planets. And he puts himself into the box of Saturn and memory. And Bruno, in his On the Shadows of Ideas, does a similar operation in one of his mnemonic wheels. Kind of inserts himself as a protagonist to be visualized in this topical grid that is also kind of a collection of mnemonic loci. And he holds his own memory book in his hand. So kind of this self-representation as a kind of a memory-struck philosopher. Also, Patrizi, another thing I didn't know and I read in this book is that Patrizi was edited Giulio Camillo, edited a portion of Camillo's work. Just to get back to what Bruno might not have liked, of course, in the most basic, elementary way from Patrizi's philosophy is, of course, this preeminence to language in cognition. So this is, even though Patrizi sometimes distances himself from it, there is kind of this general, centrality of language. which Bruno very clearly says, people that derive knowledge from words, they are fuor d'ogni scienza e filosofia. They know nothing. They're outside of science and philosophy. They just talk. But it's this kind of taking the knowledge out of words is just bad practice for Bruno. And yet we arrive at this very interesting part of Patrizi's curriculum, 1560, 1562, where he publishes these two works, Della Historia and Della Retorica, which adopt, as Tommaso put it, a more pessimistic, or he call it a Pyrrhonian stance, or radical skepticism. Why? Precisely because there is a certain critique of language there, which actually assumes certain tones that are very close to what Bruno would say, particularly in his Italian dialogues. So, for instance, this idea that the type of chains, the type of magic constraints that can be induced through language, this kind of magic bond that does resemble the love bond that you can really kind of take people with, is mostly abused. This power of the word is mostly used in a bad fashion. And actually Patrizi goes through a very interesting genealogy, according to which, actually this was the very reason for rhetoric to be born in the first place, was as an act of protection from the weak, just to convince the unruly majority that justice and peace were so great. So in that sense, you have a sense of commonality between, or a convergence with Bruno's, some of Bruno's pessimistic take, together with this sense that there is kind of a bond through word that does resemble, that is intimately linked with magic. In fact, Bruno discusses this bond in his magic, in his works on magic. And perhaps more importantly, the doctrine of infinity. So there are some common sources between Bruno and Patrizi. Nicola Cusano, I would say, Cusanus, and Palingenio Stellato, a lesser-known author. Patrizi, at some point, for instance, delivers a critique to Giulio Camillo, which also seems to imply that also, language can be involved in this entrapment by which you deny the true nature of reality, which is infinite, by trying to, devise certain rhetorical machines that, as Patrizi puts it, trap the ocean in the cup. So, at some point, Patrizi reaches this critique of rhetoric, the way that Giulio Camillo does, describing it as an entrapment, even counting the fact that combinatorics was meant to be an attempt to illustrate in a conspectus infinity. And finally, since we were talking about this one of the last sentences that we know from Bruno, that say, I know that Patrizi legitimately is a philosopher, we are at the mercy of the Inquisition, of the Pope, and so why Bruno talks about Patrizi in that moment? Where this probably has to do with the fact that Bruno gets wind of the possible influence that Patrizi might have through his first-hand connections with Rome, and he has a shimmer of a hope, perhaps, that a reformed Platonism might sweep the church and might kind of steer it towards a process of reform that is not exactly what Bruno envisaged, because Bruno is mostly anti-Aristotelian, but is also much more distant from Plato than Patrizi. But essentially, the sense is that perhaps people like Patrizi could just have a profound positive impact on the church. And the last thing that Bruno and Patrizi, I think, might have in common is a bad one, is the fact that, you know, in the end, this reform didn't came. Patrizi's work were put under the Index Librorum Prohibitorum, so it underwent censorship in 1594, right? So 6 years before Bruno was burned at stake. So this, I would say, I would leave it at a last point of intersection, of convergence between the two. So.
So yes, the difference the main difference that Patrizi was a close friend of the Pope and Bruno no. So yeah, thank you for this very generous presentation, but I have to underline the point that you raised up, and the point regard the aesthetic situation of this debate in the late Renaissance Italy, because yes, we have talked about Patrizi's aesthetic work, but, and this is fundamental, also Bruno dissolve on the aesthetic point, the eroici furori, but, and I'm going to conclude on this direction, Bruno, when talk about the art of memory, in a fundamental treatise of Bruno's art of memory, talk about this fact that the faculty of memory, it's a sort of painter, but in this sense, the cognitive act is a painter, but is also a poet, but it is also a philosopher. And in this sense, if we read a marvelous work of Bruno, the Eroici Furori, the text is structured as a philosophical, poetical comments to a verbal portrait. So, if also Bruno say that painting, poetry, and philosophy can become all the same facts, have different graduation of the cognitive act of the human being, we can trust to Bruno, we can trust to Patrizi, and we have to say, without art, without poetry, we can't have a philosophy, and we can't have humanity, I think I could say. So, grazie.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for inviting me, Tommaso.
Thank you, Tommaso. Okay, thank you, everybody. We thank Tommaso Ghezzani, we thank Linda Cardan, and we thank Luca Caldironi for having come here. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.